Welcome to the Franciscan Spirituality Center in La Crosse, Wisconsin's What is Spirituality podcast. Your host, Steve Spilde, is the Associate Director at the Center. His guests talk about their evolving understanding of God, prayer, healing, and wholeness.
Today, it's my pleasure to welcome Sister Rita Heires. Sister Rita is someone that I've had the honor to know for several years. One of the reasons why I am speaking with her today is that Sister Rita is the oldest sister at Saint Rose Convent. I find Sister Rita to be an amazing person. Always enjoy my visits with her. One of the things I enjoy in visiting with her is her sense of perspective. She's 93 years old. She was born in 1926. She has actual memories of the Great Depression. She has actual memories of World War II, especially during this time of the pandemic, when this is a very difficult time for folks. Sister Rita has seen a lot of life and seen similar experiences in the past. Without further ado, I want to welcome Sister Rita Heires.
Hello.
Sister Rita, tell me about your family. You grew up in rural Iowa on a farm. Tell me about your family. How many siblings, where you belonged in the family?
I grew up just on the edge of the little town of Carroll, which at that time had about 5,000 members. My mother and father lived on this farm where we grew up. And the farm is actually my father's farm. His dad built that house. And just as an interesting aside, it cost $1,600 to build that house. Lumber came from a little neighboring town called Maple River. And it was a lovely house. It was a Florentine in style, had ornate kinds of trim on it and so on. So this is where I grew up, yes.
And that house was built in about what year?
It would have to be about 1900, I would say.
Wow, 1900.
I'm sure there is an exact time, but around that time, yes. So my family is composed of 8 siblings. My father and mother, Walter and Rose Heires, and my mother's name was Rose Brooke Heires. And so we had 8 children. The oldest was Dorothy, who became Sister Mary Walter as a Franciscan sister here at St. Rose. The second was Helen, who became a medical mission sister and from the order in Philadelphia. The next 3 boys, Carl, Paul, and Donald. And then comes myself and 2 more boys, Alfred and John. So I always call myself the middle of 5 boys.
In your family, you had those 8 children.
Right.
2 of your sisters became religious sisters. So right. You had that experience. So your family experienced the Great Depression. Your dad was trying to take care of 8 kids in the midst of the Great Depression. Both your parents, how did they remain resilient in that very difficult time?
Well, everybody was in the same circumstances, which I think gave a sense of support to each other. When the stock market broke in 1929, that was a huge loss, and it created a sense of stress on everybody. I think the comforting part was everybody was in the same circumstances. So no one was poorer, perhaps. I'm sure there was a gradation of poverty. And they were people of great faith. Their faith was very strong to them. And Carroll is a very Catholic town. We always called it the Sioux City of Iowa. And Sioux City was a very, very, very Catholic, as well as Dubuque is even more Catholic. At any rate, Iowa has pockets of Catholicity and then lots of Methodists, etc. We made do with practically anything and nothing. We always had enough food. We lived on the farm, so it was never a matter of starvation or any kind of poverty that way. But poor in many other ways, we all were. There was a scarcity of clothing, a scarcity of, we had what we needed, but never anything go to waste. We have handed down, as many families have done in all ages, I think. I would say that my father was always a very serious and burdened man, concerned for how to make things meet. And I remember my mother telling me at one time that he said if he just had $1,000 in the bank, he would feel so grateful and relieved. Now that's not very much, but of course money went a little farther in those days too than it does in this time. With the faith of God and very faithful to each other and to all of us. I think that was probably the guiding of it all. And good friends. He was a friend to everybody. That helped too.
But basically you're saying that part of what made the Great Depression so stressful was there was no margin, there was no savings. I mean, it really was getting through day by day, week by week, and trusting that you would have what you needed for today, and you didn't have energy to worry about tomorrow.
That's correct. And and just following the Depression years, that was mostly 29, 30, 31, and just actually sort of coming out of the economic depression. Then in 33 and 34 in Carroll, where we lived, we had a severe drought. And I remember my brother telling me, he was old enough to pick corn in those days, and he said the entire farm of corn yielded 90 bushels of corn, the whole farm. Now, of course, the 160 acres would have small grain and hay and pasture land, so it wasn't like it was a whole 160 acres of corn. But can you imagine? That would probably be 3 wagon loads.
And so, as a result of that, starvation was actually a concern for your family, even though you lived on a farm. Has the farm produced enough for us to survive?
Right. But again, I would emphasize we had big garden, and Mother would can. And we didn't have lockers in those days. We didn't have, freezers, so there was nothing like that. But canning they would have hundreds of cans of fruits and vegetables and meat. We never felt starvation. Simple foods and simple meals, and you ate what was on the table, that was for sure. It wasn't a matter of, I don't like this or anything like that. They were just happy to have whatever we had. It was a struggle, that's for sure.
Part of what I'm hearing you say was part of the challenge of that. There was the economic depression that started in 1929, and then that had started to ease somewhat, but then you had the drought, which added a couple more years of very, very challenging times for people on the farm. And then about the time that started to ease up, then World War II was looming and began, correct?
Right, that's right. I would just add this cute little incident about the whole thing, too. My 2 sisters, Dorothy and Helen, were going to St. Angela Academy, which was a tuition school. I know my tuition was $40 a year. I can't remember if theirs was less than that, but there wasn't money to pay for that, but the sisters were very happy to receive food because there were boarders there also. So we raised a lot of potatoes, and when the potatoes were harvested, they would take a whole wagon load of potatoes down to the academy and store it there for the sisters and boarders to pay for their tuition. So again, that was another way of bartering and getting the job done.
Wow. You have memories of these times, which was very challenging. And you shared with me, too, not only raising food in the garden was the difference between survival and not surviving. And yet, even then, at the peak of the drought, there was actually concern that the well was going dry. And so your dad had to go to town and bring water from town so that the livestock would have water to drink.
That's correct, yes.
So it was kind of challenge upon challenge.
Right.
In what ways does that feel familiar now, and in what ways is it very different than what you're experiencing right now?
Now we have so many more resources and possibilities of things. I think the challenge is pretty much real regardless of where you're looking at, what era of time it is. Expectations are higher today than they were then. I think it calls upon the same kind of faith and trust, but I guess I would go back to expectations are not as great then as they are now. Even to be without air conditioning, we think we're going to die, don't we? And I remember when my father was very sick. He also had blood poisoning at one time when he was very sick at home. His brother had an electrical shop, and he brought out a fan, probably 10 inches in diameter. And that was the one, and we had blowing on him because he was so sick. that was the rest was, we slept out on the lawn at night sometimes. It was so hot in the house and so on. So, expectations are just so different today. In a sense, we've become wimps for what we were then. All right, I don't decry that, but at any rate, what a different era.
What's your sense of how this will go going forward, this time of challenge?
Boy, that's the $1 million question, isn't it? Because it just seems like we have no end time to this, but it will end at some time, I'm sure. Science will come to the rescue again. What is the sense of how it's going to go? I don't have the faintest idea. It's going to call upon the same kind of faith and trust upon all of us as it did for those folks. I guess I keep coming back to the expectations are just so different today than they were then. But we all want happiness and safety and comfort of some sorts. I think that's $1 million question.
What I hear you saying, though, that part of what will change is our expectations.
That could very well be. I guess the one thing that bothers me or gives me concern within my heart is, are we up to the change of expectations? Or is it cause for suicidal kind of actions and so on? So it's so bad. So what's the alternative, I pray for that a lot because I think people are going to feel so cornered. I suppose it depends on how deep individually our faith is and our trust in a God who is kind and good and stands by us. If we can truly, I'm speaking of all humanity, but all of us, yes, all of us will be faith-filled enough to know that we are never alone. We don't walk this way alone.
So tell me more about that faith that both sustained you back in the 1930s and the faith that sustained you now. So part of it is the sense that you are not alone, that you are not walking this alone?
Yes, I would say that. To try to find signs of gratitude within it all, that takes me back immediately to my mother in her very last years of her life. She lived to be just about 100, about 99 and a half. And I don't remember when of those last years, but someplace in like the last few years of her life, I come home and anybody would come into the house and say, well, Mom, how are you? And she'd say, oh, she said, I just can't complain. I have so much to be thankful for. That was just her absolute mantra all the time. And how she came to that was, I think, through living through all of these hard things. And so to have a grateful heart is truly a gift. And it is, who is that one says that if you say only one prayer and of gratitude, that's enough for your life or something like that, But how important a grateful heart is. I don't feel like I've got it mastered by any means, and but it does put a whole different swing, a whole different turn on what's going on in your life if we come to a point of gratitude instead of a pity party or a whatever else, that feeling sorry or deprived or interfered with or whatever else, which is what this pandemic kind of does to a person at times. You can get your head on straight again and say, but look all that we do have and how we're cared for and the many, many things that are ours, the blessings that we have. Adjustments are one thing and inconvenience is one thing, but it's not all of the things for sure. It's not convenient, but anyway.
Well, part of what I'm hearing is that don't have access to things that we used to have. Maybe we don't have the resources we had 6 months ago. Maybe we don't have the options we had a year ago. The expectations that I will always have more money than I need in the bank. I will always have, events that I can go to. Letting go of those expectations. And so maybe there's a grieving process at first of letting go of what we had. But then at some point, there's a shift to gratitude, to looking at what we do have, and maybe now noticing some things that we used to take for granted.
For sure. That's absolutely right. I think to be patient with ourselves, I've had to do that, through all of this for a while it seemed like it was layer on layer on layer on layer of loss and hardship and sadness and inconvenience. And I think loss more than anything else, and especially since the pandemic began for us, we've experienced loss and death so much among our sisters that's been so heavy and yet so beautiful. You know, it is. Our only way to get to heaven is to go through the path of death, and we want that for everybody. But it takes its own toll. It's a huge toll. And different persons have, you know, different experiences with us and all of that. And then, like just now, just in this last 3 weeks, that horrible storm that went through Iowa, went through our people that were so dear to us, and prairie woods and homes, and contact with persons who are really so stressed and strained with all of this. And even nature, the pictures, and one friend said to me, I don't even recognize where I am. It doesn't look like the place where we were at all. And the destruction of nature. People have cried over their trees and their beauties, and not that it's just a tree that fell, but people who are so intent on nature and in love with it, it is like a family member. Well, it is a family member. We know those all of creation is our brothers and sisters. And so that whole loss, so it just seems, I guess, loss on loss on loss right now. And the killings and the black people, and that, is there any end? We want to say, you know, is there any end?
Challenge followed by challenge, followed by challenge.
Right.
Well, you've mentioned your faith sustained you in the past. So what does faith mean to you at this point? When your faith is sustaining you, how would you characterize that?
Kind of like your life breath, isn't it? You know, you can't live without it. And the more ease in breathing, the more healthy and aware we are and can cope with whatever's going on. How intent our faith can be for us, or active and alive, the more able we are to live the day with a spirit of life. Just life. Yeah, spirit of life. Just moving with it. How that goes day by day is part of gift, you know. It's part of gift. It's part of our condition of health of mind and body. The ability that we have to not take too seriously the foibles and the aches and the pains and the whatever else comes with life at this time.
As I listen to you, part of what I hear, an element of that is a connection to life, that people who lose faith really lose a desire to be alive, lose a desire to live. People who have a sense of faith really do feel connected to life and see signs of life even in the midst of challenge. Is that similar to your understanding?
I would say so. And there's just a short phrase that I've loved for years that somehow came out in our discussions called loving presence. And that means so much to me. Loving presence with one another, loving presence with our God, loving presence with nature, loving presence with ourself. And I think in heaven that will be loving presence in completion. That's a phrase that has a lot of meaning for me, an experience of God. God's presence with me as well as my presence with God, and presence with one another as a living presence of God, you know. And nature too. Oh gosh, how lovely all of nature speaks of the presence of God. Yeah.
Knowing you, I know that the experience of adoration, of sitting in silence in the adoration chapel, is an important tool of your spirituality. It's a way for you to restore your faith. How would you describe your experience of being in adoration?
You know, first of all, it's a marvelous, marvelous gift. Adoration in the Blessed Sacrament, in the Adoration Chapel, or any place, is truly, truly gift and precious. Adoration elsewhere is equally gifted. I think the adoration in nature is not equally, but almost. Presence of God. I feel so privileged to be able to enter into that presence whenever it can happen. Sometimes mental and heartfelt presence is a little harder to come by, we might call it distractions or weariness or whatever else. But when it's there in its fullest capacity that it can be, it is truly a heavenly gift, and a person can only live in deep gratitude for. There are times the actual physical presence of the Adoration Chapel has been for me just like an aura of beauty and grace and goodness. The phenomenon of the sun's rising upon the gold and the monstrance and the beauty of the setting has been truly an experience of mystical presence, and I feel very grateful for that and know it as gift. It's truly gift. It's nothing merited or whatever, but it is truly gift. Equally valuable are the times when it's more difficult to be there or sleepy or whatever else happens with nature and all of it. No less grateful am I for the times of presence in my own room here, where I am a lot of times in these days of less exposure to out of doors and people and whatever else we did before. So though it is in a certain way a confinement by the pandemic, it is also a gift. For that I, again, am grateful. It's kind of like if, the old saying, if you have lemons, make lemonade. Okay, if you have seclusion, then use it for the best you can. And that's not always easy, and that's not always fulfilled with a great deal of grace and aplomb, believe me.
Well, kind of along the way of gratitude, kind of taking this full circle. Your prior expectations, the expectation, the freedom of movement, the expectation to interact with your fellow sisters socially, some of that's been taken away, but you're finding sources of gratitude in the midst of that. It does give you time to be more contemplative in your apartment. It does add meaning to that time of prayer in the Adoration Chapel. The piece I want to clarify, you talked about the light coming through the windows. You oftentimes pray at sunup, correct?
That's correct.
The light coming through the windows really becomes an important part of your experience.
It does. And sometimes, if I have had my eyes closed or whatever else and open, and the sun has just come in, or I'm looking at it when it comes in, whatever. And, the morning has broken, that song just breaks in my heart, too. The morning has broken, and whatever morning means. Morning has many different connotations to the morning in our life, the morning in our love, whatever else. But it is, and there's a metallic tone that graces on that has been very touching for me. It's just been very beautiful. And, if you think of in the Old Testament and some of those other biblical writings of creation and sun and the deer and all those kinds of lovely images that come through, it just is like an avalanche of wonderful things that come to my mind and all of that,
The image that comes to me is that oftentimes people talk about the voice of God, but in your experience, so oftentimes it's an image of God. God doesn't come to you as a voice so much. God comes to you as a color, as a light, as an image.
Right. The softness of the image, I'm not very attracted to the sharpness of light on hard metal, gold, or whatever else. But this is such a tone. It's just a softness to it that is elegant to me.
If you have any questions about any of the programs that they offer at the Franciscan Spirituality Center in La Crosse, Wisconsin, we invite you to call us at 608-791-5295. That's 608-791-5295. You can also visit our website at www.fscenter.org. www.fscenter.org. Thank you for listening.